Welcome to another special episode of Subscription Matters. Today we have our original guest, Nick Cherrier, who has many years of experience around strategy consulting and pricing. Nick, welcome again. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good to be here, Jack.
Great. So last time you were here, we talked and touched on the subscription business model and the resilience of that, and we talked around how that is becoming really a rising, continuing business model that a lot of businesses are adopting because of its resilience. So today I wanted to talk a little bit more about a certain aspect of the subscription industry, which is high growth SaaS startups. And I wanted to delve into the intricacies of strategies and how to implement those strategies, touch around pricing and customer acquisition and churn, just how an enterprise SaaS company or a company in that industry that's looking to start up or that's currently in that early phase, to talk about the that journey and what are some of the tips and tricks from your experience that we can unpack, if that's okay with you. So one of the key things I wanted to ask you is around readiness for these high growth startups. Can you share some indicators or factors that startups should consider determining if they're truly ready for this subscription business model and how they can address any gaps in that readiness stage?
Okay. Absolutely. So, I mean, the term, I think the term readiness is, I really like that term, actually. I think if companies are already asking themselves about readiness, that's probably already a good kind of sign, because it talks to a recognition that you may not be ready, right? With startups, I think the key consideration is already, are you born in the subscription world, or are you actually born with an idea and then looking to your business model, right? There are a lot of businesses out there that will look at similar kind of startups and find that many startups have subscriptions as their core path to monetization, and therefore it's nearly a no-brainer that they will adopt that kind of business model, especially true in SaaS, for example. However, you do have quite a few startups that come up with a concept, start charging in a certain way, get off the ground, and in the very early days, they also start thinking, is this the best way to bring our products or services to market, or should we pivot towards an alternative way? And I think this is where readiness probably comes into mind, in my opinion. In answering the question, though, what should you be looking for in terms of signals? For me, the number one thing you need to be looking for is customer centricity. And I think this is a topic we raised briefly last time. But what I mean by that is, in order for you to be successful in the subscription world, you need to be able to provide recurring value to your customers. And that means that you need to understand what your customers want and how to best deliver that to them. And I know a lot of businesses say that they are customer focused or subscriber centric. The reality is most of them are not. They think they are, but after, you just have to go into one of their meetings to understand a lot of these businesses tend to be either very product focused. It's very inward looking in terms of the product, especially if they love the product that they're bringing. Or alternatively, you also have a lot of businesses that are very sales focused, right? They think about how fast growth, how can we grow, double digit or triple digit in the early stages, and there's that growth kind of mindset that nearly obfuscates the customer centricity that they should have. So
what are some of the signs that indicate to you that these startup enterprises in the SaaS industry have that customer centricity focus? What are the
Yeah,
kind of things that you see
it's
that
very cultural.
indicates that?
It is very cultural. I find that usually when decisions are made, and not just at the top level, but through as it trickles through the organization. I've seen some organizations that have that kind of mantra where it's like, is it a good change for the customer? You know, are we doing this with the customer in mind? Which is which is a good question to ask,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And if the decision is usually just, you know, no, it's in pursuit of a business goal, but the customers may not like it, or we you know, let's not tell the customer, that's probably a sign that your business is not ready for subscriptions.
So would it be fair for me to say that if it's going to generate revenue or profit, it may not necessarily tie into a customer centricity, right? That can be something that is not always directly related.
Well, I think, you know what, there's a misconception when it comes, obviously having spent a lot of time in pricing, there's a misconception when it comes to pricing and profitability versus the customer centricity. I don't see those things as being concepts that are opposed. Usually, if you can make a profit and grow a profitable business, the argument is that it's probably better for the customer because it means you're going to be around for a long time and keep delivering that value.
That's good. That's a good point.
It also means, by the way, that you know, if you're able to make the sale at the right price point, you're obviously, profitability is really about trying to enlarge the surface of the win for the business. But in reality, if you have a core customer segment that is willing to pay above the price that you're charging, it's really a win-win, right? So the customer is willing to pay for the value that you provide them, and in response, you know, you're probably going to be above board and be able to grow faster because you're making more profit. But you're right. I think a lot of businesses have a zero-sum game mindset where, you know, but truly, right, like there is that kind of consideration. If I charge more for this product, that means that it's bad for the consumer. Not really. As long as you're not exploiting your customers, as long as you're charging a price that is below what they're willing to pay for, then absolutely you should do it, right?
Okay. So you've nicely kind of dovetailed into the pricing aspects for SaaS startups. This is a critical aspects for being successful startup and growing. As you know, you can be a unicorn or you can have a steady growth, but every SaaS company there's really looking for that exponential hyper growth. What strategies, you've already mentioned some, or best practices do you recommend for startups, SaaS startups, in terms of you know, setting the right price points for the different packages? Can you just give us some examples there that you've seen work well?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of pricing, like I think last time when we're talking about pricing, the key consideration was don't overcomplicate things, was kind of like the message. And what I mean by that is, even though I've been doing pricing for a long time, whenever people tell me that they have a pricing problem, usually that is partially true. But you know, the pricing issue, or, you know, I don't know what to price, is kind of like the surface of it, and a little bit like an iceberg. There's usually more things that are below the water. Typically, what I've tend to observe is usually you lack key considerations either around the offering or either who is this targeting, who is my consumer customer. So you should always start, whenever you're building your product to market, the first consideration should be, who am I targeting in the market with this solution? You know, who am I building this solution or this product for? Because you're trying to address a need, but the first consideration is who wants it, right? And I think like the first kind of point of failure is usually when you have businesses that do not consider a specific customer segment. Either they go too broad or they actually haven't answered, you know, the question. I've heard someone say, you know, you can target everyone. That's a strategy. It's probably a bad strategy, but it's still a strategy, right? usually, especially in the startup world, it's better to try and figure out a niche and then try to expand from that niche. But so you start with the customer, whose problem am I trying to solve? And you can quantify that, right? Like in order to project growth and things like in terms of the size of the market. But then based on the reason why you also start from the customer is that if you know what their problem is and you can gather data around their behaviors and preferences and things like that, that also allows you to then build an offering that is targeted towards that specific kind of customer group. And I would say then as a third layer, your pricing arrives. But you first have to know who you're targeting, what are you building for them, and then finally is okay, well, how much are they going to be willing to spend for what I'm building here, right? So that's I think the key consideration. Then again, like don't overcomplicate things in terms of the model. There's normally when you're building your subscription offering, there's two key consideration around pricing. One is what's the metric. So am I going to be charging for seats, for data, megabytes, gigabytes, for kilometers of usage? Like what's the metric that you're using as a core price factor? And secondly, what is the model that you're using? And so typically in a lot of subscriptions, especially in the early days, a model is usually a flat fee for the month. For example, it's probably the most common, like with Netflix, you pay $19 a month and you get access to everything. So that's kind of like a nice, easy model to understand. What you can do is then have lots of variations around it. So you have SaaS businesses that say you pay a certain fee for an amount of seats, but you can add seats, you can add data, you can add like premium packages around like customer service. Like there's a lot of little things that you can do as you grow and expand. I always recommend start from a simple kind of basis, and then as your product evolves, as you're trying to reach out to more customers, then you can start playing with fancy models.
And that's really helpful because, as you know, with a lot of enterprise SaaS companies out there, they hyper growth year one and year two. Customer acquisition becomes the key. So that pricing ties in with how you're going to ramp up and onboard your customers. Can be a challenge for startups because you're either bootstrapped or you're getting seed funding or you're running on your own cash flow. Again, what are some of the effective techniques for acquisition strategies that help these SaaS companies reach their acquisition targets, whether that be revenue, number of users, or number of businesses?
Yeah, well, as a transition from I guess the pricing model, very often what you see is subscription businesses use the price lever as a way to acquire. Probably some of the most common techniques are through coupons or free trials. So what they do is they try and lure customers in by having a lower cost of entry essentially, or providing additional value for an extended period of time or something, right? So that's the idea, is bring people in with a lot of front-loaded value and get them to essentially try to reduce cost your service. That's probably one of the most common ways to do it. Not necessarily always easy. It works better in a B2C environment. B2B when you.
That's what I was about to say. Something like a direct-to-consumer organization, where you might have like an online presence. That can be a bit of a self-service. That makes complete sense. What about if there's like enterprise SaaS companies that's more B2B focused or B2C, where they could be doing both, servicing the direct to consumers and be SMBs or enterprise companies?
Yeah, so with B2B, you have to be honest, in terms of acquisition, you do have less tools. Usually what you're relying on is a well-oiled machine in terms of your marketing, business development, and sales force, right? Like it's an element of those kind of like three things in combination. There's a question around the systems that you use to build efficiencies in terms of that team, but I think more importantly, it comes down to how these people operate. How do you generate leads? How do you go after these leads? and of course, what's the sales motion that you have. Again,
Mhm.
you potentially, and of course, that better than me, Jack, but you probably have in your tool set a lot of levers that you can pull when discussing with clients around onboarding them to a certain solution. And of course, some of them are price related, but not always, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So some of them are mature, or some of them you have to get data and information from different systems to service your B2B customers.
I mean, for startups, I think the irony is that the hardest is usually the early days, because when you start becoming more successful when you have logos that you've acquired, right? Like if you can
That's correct.
show a page that has like pretty powerful brands in industries that you're targeting, that becomes a much easier sell, as opposed to, well, you would be our first telco if you joined, or like it's a much harder kind of like discussion.
Yeah.
But that can be alleviated if you have the right partnerships in place. So whether it is people from other organizations that can help you, people from implementation or consulting firms that believe in your product, or introductions from existing people that have been exposed to your solutions. Again, I think this is somewhere probably in the sales toolkit. But essentially, I think it's a bit more professional and harder in a B2B sense than it typically is for a B2C sense, where in B2C you have I think a little bit easier levers, whether you're talking about even
Mhm.
having freemiums that you can have in terms of different tiers of models and things that you can play with more things in B2C than in B2B.
Now you've mentioned that a really good pricing or acquisition strategy. Whether that falls into pricing or acquisition, I'm not sure. But with freemiums, can you give a quick brief what a freemium, how that would work
Yeah.
for a B2C and a B2B, I guess. Same
Okay.
principles.
So and you know what, like actually a very very good call out, because what you find is often in a freemium world you can have a combination of B2C customers and B2B customers. Actually, I have been asked in the past several times, what's the difference between free trials and freemiums, and like it can be a bit confusing what all these pricing things can be in terms of trying to acquire customers. So free trials, we're really talking about, you get 1 month for free when you join, or we give you a discount. You pay for 1 month, you get 3 months, this kind of thing. You're trying to add a lot of value, front load the value, and hopefully convince the customer that it's worth the money that you're then trying to get from them at a monthly level or annual level.
Well, I see a lot of SaaS companies doing that, where you might have like 30-day free trial, or
Yep.
like 7 days.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
then automatically that'll kick into some kind of subscription, whether it be monthly or annual.
What you're looking for with free trials is low implementation costs, right? Low barriers to entry. With freemium, the proposition is very different. What you have with freemium is a multi-tiered offering, where at the simplest level you have 2 tiers. You have a free tier and you have a paid tier. But you could have more than one paid tier, right? Like you could have complex pricing tiers above it.
Makes sense.
But in essence, what you have is you do have a tier where you can just join for free. Usually you sign up. All they collect from you is your email and some data, your user data. But then you get to use a platform. So again, common in SaaS, for free. I think Canva, LinkedIn, like a lot of these kind of like things where you can join, you can use.
Yeah.
There's no fee for you as a standard user.
Yeah.
However, the key to monetization is actually having a tier of paid subscribers, which are going to be very valuable and will compensate for those that are not paying anything.
Is that like, could you make that like, if you've got that free tier, and if they want to use 1 or 2 more features or go up into the next feature upgrade, then they need to start pulling out the credit card and
Yeah, so
paying the additional fee or whatever.
typically what a business will do is that they will look at gating certain features. So and this is where I think when we started with like the view of you start from the customer and what they want. Freemium is a really good model when you where by scaling the community you're adding value to the product as a whole, right? So if you think of there are some SaaS businesses out there that are in the developing world, the tools development world, and the more engineers that you have on the platform developing code and things like that, the more it kind of like strengthens the community. And so what you want is actually you want to attract a lot of these free users, because what it does is then the features that you provide your paid users are going to be more valuable.
No, that makes sense. I see that a lot with a lot of SaaS companies where it's for SMB or even for enterprise, where you get to trial their software, whether it be business productivity tools, sales tools, or HR tools. The adoption, right? You might use it for 1 month, then you feel you need to use it more, and then you need more and more features. Then you start to actually start paying for the additional capability and additional features, which is a really important strategy for a lot of SaaS companies out there. So thanks for sharing that, Nick. Now, we've touched on acquisition, pricing, and obviously readiness. Now let's move into, once you've acquired them, you want to keep them now, right? Now so this dreaded term that we all use in the subscription industry, which is churn, right? And it's just as important as when you acquire customers, you want to make sure that you retain them and keep them and they become a loyal customer. So what about some tactics around ensuring that they keep using your service, your product, so that your churn does not increase and you reduce it?
Yeah, well, so I think one of the last pieces of work I did with Zuora was actually around this question of retention and churn, and specifically we were looking at I think a question that I think a lot of businesses at some subscription businesses at some point will ask themselves, which is what's the percentage of our revenue that is generated by our existing cohorts, our existing subscribers, versus the portion of revenue that is generated by the new customers that we're bringing in. And so when we did this study, we found throughout the data that we used, first of all, that the answer was somewhere between 70 to 80% of revenue was generated by existing customers.
Wow.
And that number changed quite significantly based on the maturity of the business. So as you start, it's very instinctive. The first year, obviously, 100% is going to be generated by new customers because you're starting from scratch. But ideally, going to that notion of retention, you're hoping that you're even though you don't have an amazing product probably in year one, you're going to try and retain most of them, and in year two, that 100% is going to decrease to a lower amount based on the fact that you have a higher retention level. So over time, what happens is that you have your existing subscriber base that increases, and it kind of like gets to a point where after 5 years or 3 to 5 years, usually you get to that kind of 70 to 80% figure, where that's recurring revenue from customer that you've acquired in the past, and you need, essentially what you're trying to do is avoid having a leaky bucket. You don't want to add customers but lose the same amount on the other side. You want to be adding more customers than you're losing. And so this is fundamentally the trick in being successful in subscription. Is not necessarily to the other alternative is increasing your price, which you're going to upset customers if you keep doing that as a way to grow. The standard approach is you grow faster than you churn. And in order to be effective, like the tactic here, the number one tactic in order to be effective at that is really data led. What you need to do is understand what causes churn. So it's a little bit like going to see the doctor and getting a diagnostic. It's basically, if you have a business, you need to have probably a data team or something that can identify based on usually like usage is the way to go.
Yep.
You know,
I was about to ask you that. So it's either usage. It depends also on what industry you're in and what industry your customers are in.
yeah.
Because I mean, like you've obviously had some experience with media, right? When usage kind of peaks, that's normally
It's like
that's normally an indication in the media or in the OTT industry that people might be binging on some shows because they might churn. Is that right? Is that?
Yeah, I see the angle. It could be like actually, that's a behavior. You know, actually, what comes to mind is usually when you know. I think in an environment they've seen in a corporate world when an employee would download a lot of data, usually it was a sign that
Yeah.
they were probably interviewing somewhere else, right? So there's an element of
Yeah.
that peak that, but I would say that's a probably noise in the data, right? It could be that very high usage usually is correlated to, in most cases, it's correlated to good value being perceived by the customer, right? Obviously, if it's just a peak and then it stops, like there's something strange going on. But why usage data is important is if you see that customers stop using your products for a long period of time, that means they're not seeing value from it. And the number one thing to retain your customers is for your customers to see value in your products and services. So trying to bring them back in, understanding what drives their value perception, that's key. And that's why usage is probably a very good indicator. Now, by the way, this is true for digital businesses. If you have physical goods through subscription, obviously usage is much easier to measure, and it's a very different consideration. But the end, I like to see people answer NPS to that question. You know, how do you avoid churn? Because a lot of businesses look at NPS in terms of satisfaction scores, but it's a flawed measure usually, right? So it's usually much better to look at are your customers using the products, rather than asking, especially in a B2B sense, are you happy with the services? Sometimes people that are answering those questions are not necessarily the users. It could be that there's an angle for certain answers. So usually track data as a first kind of like point of call, and have a data team that knows how to identify churn. It could take a little bit of time to draw correlations, but usually, you know, based on the business that you're looking at, seasonality could be a very important factor.
Absolutely.
And you know, so there's a lot of considerations to take into account, but usually it always comes to the key of, is your customer seeing the value in what you're giving them?
Absolutely. And look, we've touched on readiness. We talked about some pricing strategies, and then obviously customer acquisition and some tips and techniques around that area. And then we talked about the churn, the reduction of that, and now having some data and insight so that you understand how your customer is using or not using your products and services. So kind of just to round that all off, we wanted to get your understanding as well, and some from your experience around the technology transformation for these startups. I guess the good thing for SaaS startups is because they're starting up, they don't have a lot of these existing systems in place. So what technology options or tools should they look to explore to facilitate this kind of transformation around readiness, pricing, and then acquisition, right down to churn reduction, and then the analytics as they go to that next stage of their journey, which is to scale and optimize?
Yeah. So I will confess that that's not my area of expertise, but the way I think about it is really through the lens of the quote to cash. And to your point, you can actually operate in a subscription business at a startup level with very little systems, right? Like you have some businesses out there that have like a core system that is homemade, that does some of the core functions, and they can survive on it for a few years until, you know, they get to a scale where either they don't have in-house the talent to maintain and grow that system, or they make, you know, usually the smart decision that is, you know what, like there are professionals out there that have figured it out a very long time ago, and we can actually build efficiencies by bringing some of these tools that are already out there. So usually the solution is, unless it's your core business, it's always good to consider things that you don't have to build yourself. And so if you look at so the quote to cash is how I kind of like to think about it from a systems perspective. So you think of it as a chain from generation, like lead generation and quoting, fundamental, and you go all the way to cash, which is like how do you realize your get paid and then eventually recognize that revenue in a system. And so one of the first, probably not in terms of like importance of consideration, but just for the sake of following this chain, if we start from the beginning, you would have first probably your CRM system, some kind of like marketing interface that allows you to generate leads, track them, being especially very, very important in consolidating, I think, a lot of information for business development, etc., and lead generation. When you have when you consider this as your first lens, your entry point from market to within the business, the second consideration is what products do I provide to these customers. So then the next question is, where does my product catalog sit? Do I have a system where I've got something neat for my product? Again, this is maybe not one of your earliest consideration. If you have a startup with a very simple product and very simple model, you don't necessarily need a catalog. But as you start expanding the type of products that you have, the way you can charge on different products, it could be that you start building permutations and business models that are becoming very complex, and then having a quoting system, what they call a CPQ, for example, could be a very useful tool. The area that we come from is obviously billing, right? Like billing and at scale. So creating an invoice, sending those bills, again, usually maybe not necessarily the first kind of thing that you need in the early days when you have a small scale. But what you'll find out is that at some point you're going to reach a critical mass, especially true in a B2C model, where you're generating a lot of invoices. In subscription, the way it gets complex is that you have a lot of change orders, because people are going to want to amend their subscription.
If you're customer centric, you need to make sure that whatever the customer wants, you're able to facilitate provide that. So there's a lot of changes that happen with that. So which can be part of your success or downfall as a business, right? If you want to be customer centric.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So if you're able to identify the customers, if you then have a catalog, you can quote, you can invoice and bill your customers. What comes next is payment. So what are the payment solutions that you plug into in order to facilitate the life of your customers? Make sure that it's not difficult for them to pay you. And then you get into finally the more like the accounting world of how are you recognizing revenue? How are you transferring that kind of like revenue recognition into an ERP in order to have a translation for your general ledger? And the last thing that I think doesn't probably fit very well in that quote to cash lens, but however is customer centric, so I would be remiss not to mention it, is that view of also how do you communicate with your customer throughout the journey, right? So do you have a way to build a customer interaction and customer journey through a logic where you can like automate SMS, emails, and things like that, so that you consider the journey of your customer. So those in my opinion are kind of like the core systems. You of course have many other kind of like adjunct systems that you can build on top,
or that can attach onto that, but that is a whole other episode for another. But you've given us really some experience and expert advice around and practical advice around how startups really should consider from launching, from pricing, right down to acquisition, right down to churn and then revenue recognition, right, and analytics. So thanks for that. We've just right on the end, and wanted to thank you again, Nick, for sharing with us your insights and advice around the subscription industry and specifically for enterprise SaaS startups. Once again, thank you, Nick, and we'll look forward to talking to you again in the future. Thank you.